The Stain episode is probably the best example of semantics being both a hindrance and a blessing to the show. Not only does it undermine the ability to determine a winner, but it also paves the way for some of the best rapid-fire vignettes KVS has to offer. The first competition of the episode is First Guy to Get a Stain Loses. Convoluted and semantic buffoonery lead to the guys calling a no contest where a winner cannot be declared. So they decide to settle it with a series of high-risk stain situations, making the second competition whoever has the most stains loses. In light of the first half of the episode having no winner, let's just skip right to the high-risk stain situations. Now, I have incorrectly referred to this part of the episode as a sudden death competition. It is not. It is a stain-themed series of mini-comps. So let's determine who won Mini-Comps Stain Edition. Kenny wins Sergeant Splatters. The guys engage in a battle where each one gets a hopper full of paintballs, and when they run out, the match is over.
I'm out! I'm out too.
Clearly, Spenny lost the battle. But what if I told you Kenny had significant help from the crew? Check this out.
Go away, go away, go away.
I wonder where Spenny is. Look, there's his crew. Hey, where's Spenny?
The crew, specifically the cameraman, will always give away the position of each guy. Kenny's crew was intuitive enough to hide behind walls and structures as much as possible to prevent Spenny from getting a read on Kenny's movements. But Spenny's crew just stood out in the open and pointed their cameras at Spenny. As a result, Kenny almost always knew exactly where Spenny was. So Kenny wins round 1, and immediately following the win, he makes this little speech.
It's obvious the guy lost. Why don't you just make him do a humiliation?
And I always wondered why he did that. He's only won a single mini-competition. Why is it so obvious that Spenny lost the mini-comps? Spenny still had the opportunity to make a 3-1 comeback, or at least tie it. Well, thanks to Reddit user sockmonkeyjarvis, I can tell you Kenny made that speech because he was actually up 2-0. Did you know there was a 5th high-risk stain situation? Dutch Dreams. The guys went to the same ice cream shop as Melvin from Obese to serve scoops and syrup to the crew. Kenny got a stain on his thumb from a glob of chocolate syrup, and Spenny got multiple stains that just kind of mushed together into one big chocolate stain on his leg. Because of this, Kenny won Dutch Dreams. So I set out to determine where in the order of high-risk stain situations Dutch Dreams was filmed. I figured it had to be first because Spenny got painted like a Jackson Pollock during Sergeant Splatters, and he has significantly less staining at Dutch Dreams. But when I scrubbed to the beginning of the paintball match, there was no stain on Spenny's leg. I was shocked because the lack of stain could mean that he changed stain suits at one point, which in turn would mean that the show wasn't reality. But halfway through the paintball match, I saw this. I thought that looks similar to the chocolate stain, but he didn't have it before the match, so maybe that's just dirt from the paintball arena. Maybe he wiped out during the match and that's just a mud stain. So I scrubbed to the beginning of the 10 paces, well before any wipeouts. There it is. So what's going on here? I went back to the equipment distribution scene and zoomed in. They photoshopped the brown stain to white. You may not be able to see it here because my rendering of these images is at least the 3rd, if not the 4th rendering in their lifetime, but I can see the edge of the editor's blur box sticking out from Spenny's leg. Well, okay, that makes sense. There's no scripting or fake reality here. They just removed the stain digitally in post-production to avoid confusion about the show's continuity because they weren't going to include the Dutch Dreams segment in the final cut of the episode. Lava legs. Kenny intentionally spilled some coffee on Spenny, and both guys held the coffee cups closer to their knees than over their crotch. So how am I supposed to pick a winner? When I look at the footage of them getting out of the van, they look equally stained. Like, there's no way for me to count the number of stains on each guy, and there's no way for me to measure who lost more coffee from their cup. So let's consider the physics of it for a moment. If you were to take 2 cups filled with the same amount of coffee, suspend them inside a van, and drive down the road, in theory they would be subject to the exact same forces, so they would lose the exact same amount of coffee, and therefore each guy would have the exact same number of stains, stain patterns, and stain sizes. Again, in theory. Therefore, I'm going to call Lava Legs a draw. Spenny wins bath. There were 2 rounds here. Kenny let go of the rope in round 1, and Spenny went swimming in round 2. If you slow down the footage from round 1, you can see that Spenny was able to pull Kenny's weight off of his rear foot, and his body weight was continuing to be pulled forward. Kenny was going to fall into the urine bath, so he just let go of the rope to avoid the loss. Spenny won. Also, you may be wondering why the setting doesn't look like the KVS backyard. That's because this is the neighbor's backyard at 286 Sherborne, like the adjoined house there. They filmed a handful of pieces there, like including the kitty litter dump and Kenny's side of the fence at the end of Gorilla. Choco Sabres. Okay, so right off the bat, I want to say that Spenny's saber is of poor quality. The sponge head articulates in all directions, so any attempt to thrust the chocolate at Kenny could result in the sponge head flopping down and Kenny getting poked with the edge of it instead of being stained with the face of it. That being said, everything about Choco Sabres happened so quickly that it's hard to see exactly how the battle played out, but just to be clear, this bit is not continuous footage. The battle stopped and restarted at least once, and the film is spliced together to cover it up. Spenny begins with no chocolate stains on his chest area here, and there's a piece of trash right here by the garage door. 4 seconds into the battle, Kenny gets a body strike on Spenny, but he loses his chocolate sponge head. Before we continue, it's important to note that this bigger stain is the result of Kenny's body strike, and all of these other ones are from his Triple H intro.
Fight!
Anyway, you can see the sponge bounce off over here by the garage door next to that trash I pointed out. In the next shot, you can see it landed chocolate side up, and again here. At the 9-second mark, we see our first discontinuous shot. A moment ago, Kenny lost his sponge when he caused this stain. Now his sponge is back on his saber. Well, how did that happen? Did Kenny battle his way past Spenny to retrieve it? I think it's more likely that they stopped the fight momentarily and Kenny was allowed to retrieve and reattach his sponge. Then immediately after that shot, another bit of discontinuity. Kenny's sponge is now on the ground again, this time by his feet. Well, when did that happen? There's obviously another shot missing where Kenny loses his sponge a second time. So upon retrieving his sponge, Kenny decides not to attach it a second time, but to wield it as a dagger of sorts. Just as Kenny bends down to get a hold of it, Spenny lunges, striking Kenny's hand and leaving a chocolate stain on Kenny's fingers. Spenny's momentum continues forward and his saber strikes Kenny's leg. However, during the contact with Kenny's hand, the sponge head flips up, and as Spenny continues with his forward momentum, he strikes Kenny's inner thigh with the edge of the mop head. Therefore, he does not stain Kenny a second time. The downfall of the articulating head. Kenny resorts to the defensive strategy of swinging aimlessly, hoping to knock away Spenny's weapon. With 10 seconds left in the bout, Spenny gets one last strike on Kenny's elbow, but immediately after, Kenny's wild swinging knocks the sponge head off of Spenny's saber. A now defenseless Spenny retreats down the alley only to be savagely pursued and stained with no mercy. So how the hell do I score this? With fencing rules, Kenny got 1 strike and Spenny got 3 strikes. So Spenny wins. But it's not all about strikes, it's about stains. Kenny stained Spenny's chest, and Spenny stained Kenny's hand and forearm. So Spenny wins. But Spenny got stained like a porta potty Steve-O at the end of it. So Kenny wins. But Spenny was out of the ring when he got all those stains, so do they still count? But Spenny only ran away because he was without his chocolate sponge head. So shouldn't he have been afforded the opportunity to retrieve it just as Kenny was? You know what? Kenny wins. Spenny did not defend himself after he became spongeless. Instead, he chose to make a cowardly retreat from the ring to avoid getting stained, so I think that disqualifies him. Why don't I disqualify Kenny for leaving the ring?
You're in the ring! You gotta get in the ring!
Because Kenny didn't intentionally leave the ring, and when he was told to get back in the ring, he did. So Spenny loses Choco Sabres, Spenny has the most stains, Kenny wins Mini Comps Stain Edition 3-1. But what if I told you that Mini Comps Stain Edition was just an irrelevant bit of fun? What if I told you the first guy to get a stain loses competition had a winner? Or rather, a loser. What if I told you I can determine who got stained first? Let's start at the end and work backwards and see if we can find the very first stain. Spaghetti lunch at Alice Fazooli's. I think the only implicit rule of the competition was that the guys needed to be vulnerable to being stained, which would make sense given the context of the competition. For example, if the guys put on raincoats before going paintballing, that would just be stupid, like it would defeat the purpose of the competition. So, should Kenny be disqualified for wearing the Elizabethan collar? He's wearing something which prevents his suit from being stained. However, he does take it off before eating, and therefore the collar never prevents him from being stained, so no, it does not disqualify him. Kenny and Spenny each get a stain while eating lunch. Spenny's is red, which means it came from the tomato sauce, and Kenny's is purple, which means it came from the red wine. But whose stain came first? Probably Spenny's. I can reasonably guess that Kenny's stain happened after he started messing around with the wine. So can I prove Spenny stained himself with sauce before Kenny started messing around with the wine? Yes, but only circumstantially. I caught this drop of sauce falling from Spenny's mouth while he was eating. Did you see that? I also see this stain on Spenny's napkin before Kenny pours his wine. You can see that Kenny's decanter is still full. Well, what's the significance of the stain on Spenny's napkin? It may be from wiping his mouth, but I think it's more likely the result of sauce splashing up caused by a drop falling back into the bowl. So let's start by proving the napkin stain didn't come from Spenny wiping his mouth. First of all, Spenny arranges his napkin in a specific way. He either folds it over itself like this, or he ties it in a knot like this. But the purpose of that is to create these little handles. He then holds onto the handles and he wipes his mouth on the middle of the napkin. Well, the stain is not in the middle, it's on one of those little handles. So maybe he wiped his mouth with the handle part, but I doubt it. It would be weird to wipe your mouth on the smallest, most narrow part of the napkin, especially if you're specifically trying not to stain yourself. He could easily stain his finger by accident if he holds the smallest part and wipes his mouth. So maybe he had a stain on his hands and transferred it when he grabbed the napkin to wipe his mouth. No. Spenny shows his hands to Kenny during the scene, and there's no tomato sauce on there.
All right, let's see your hands.
If there were, Kenny would have pointed it out. So what do I think? I think that if the napkin stain, that clearly happened before Kenny started messing around with the wine, is the result of an upsplash from sauce dropping back into the bowl, then the spot on Spenny's suit is also likely the result of an upsplash from sauce dropping back into the bowl. Could Spenny's stain have happened after Kenny's stain? Yes, but given the napkin stain happened before the wine stain, I think it's very possible that Spenny's sauce stain happened before Kenny's wine stain. Unfortunately, my trail of evidence ends there, and I can't draw any meaningful conclusions beyond speculation. But fortunately, something else happened before that. The orb. This is another scene worth questioning the authenticity of the show. Is Spenny actually in the orb when Kenny pees in it? It would appear as though Spenny is not in the orb. The theory is that because we are expected to believe he's standing in the orb, and we can see the apex of the orb, then we should see Spenny standing right about here, in alignment with the apex of the orb. Hypothetically speaking, if we had a perfect sphere, and Spenny were standing in the sphere, then he would be in perfect alignment with the apex of the sphere at all times. If he were to sidestep even slightly, then the sphere would roll with him and he would stay directly in the center of the sphere, aligned with the apex. Again, as you can see in this shot, this is the apex of the orb. Spenny should be standing right here, but we don't see him. So in theory, Kenny is peeing into an empty orb and Spenny's reaction is fake. Well, I've reviewed the shots, and I believe he's actually in there for two reasons. Number one, because when I compare the last zoom out before the commercial break and the first zoom out after the commercial break, where we can actually see Spenny is in the orb, everything within the shot is still in the exact same position, including Brendan's boom mic, the broom, the black mat, and even the zipper on the orb is in the correct position. Spenny rolled the orb back a little bit in his panic, but the zipper is in the right position for rolling backwards from here to here. You know what I mean? It is unlikely that these are two separate discontinuous shots. And reason number 2, because at the beginning of the orb scene we can see him inside of it and he's off-centered from the apex and the orb doesn't roll beneath him. Well, why not? Because the orb has sufficiently low internal pressure that its own mass flattens out the bottom and Spenny can stand off to the side of that flat area without forcing the orb to roll. So Spenny is definitely in there, he's just off to the side. Well, okay, but wouldn't Spenny notice Kenny pulling the plug out and like agitating, bumping the orb around, trying to insert his member? I think it's feasible that Spenny...
He's usually the guy that comes up with all the gadgets and but this time it was mine. Can you believe no instructions came in with this? None. I had to figure it out for myself.
Having his attention drawn to the camera and speaking so loudly that he causes strong vocal reverberations within the orb, didn't hear or notice Kenny open up the valve and stick his wiener in and pee. Well, okay, but wouldn't the air come rushing out after Kenny opened the valve? Given the low internal pressure of the orb and the likely one-way check valve, only a minimal amount of air would have escaped when Kenny was, like, fidgeting around with it. But he would have sealed it off again when he pushed his wiener in, right? All of that being said, I don't find anything about this scene that is fake or scripted. Should Spenny be disqualified for entering the orb? It certainly prevents him from getting a stain. So if the competition wasn't over at this point, I would have to say, yes, this disqualifies Spenny. But luckily for Spenny, the competition was already over because something happened before that. The pond. Spenny goes to retrieve his wallet, Kenny throws a rock, Spenny gets splashed, and we get one of the greatest Spenny lines in the series.
The physics of it doesn't make sense.
Did Spenny lose here? It's already been declared that you can't stain the other guy, so no, I don't think this counts. I hate to disappoint that one subscriber who was so excited to hear a breakdown of this scene, but besides being so memorable and so quintessential, there's really nothing remarkable to say about it. I'm a little bothered that the simultaneous split screen doesn't synchronize properly. As Kenny runs down the stairs, Sebi is behind him filming, and logic would dictate that Brendan is behind Sebi. Now look at the two shots exactly as they're presented to us. Sebi is passing by the entryway, and Spenny's cameraman also has the entryway in frame. Where's Sebi? Where's Brendan? Given Sebi's location on Kenny's side, and the fact that we can see the full width of the doorway on Spenny's side, we should be able to see Sebi passing by the door on Spenny's side, or at least see Sebi's back. Something like this. And we should be able to see Brendan between the treads of the stairs, but we don't. The simplest answer for Brendan is that Brendan never went upstairs. He must have waited in the living room area, which would make sense because Kenny knew that he would have to run from the top floor to the ground floor, so having fewer people in tow would be the most efficient way to prevent being caught by Spenny, right? And the simplest answer for Sebi is that the synchronization of the two cameras is off by a fraction of a second. Yes, part of Kenny's half could also be a spliced-in reshoot, but it doesn't matter anyway. I don't have any reason to think anything nefarious is going on here apart from rocks flying off of an old house. So let's talk about that. Did Kenny stain his hand here on the wood, or did he stain his hand here on the rock? Well, I can say that he didn't get a stain from the rock because he held it with a paper towel. See the white here? Like after he throws it, you can see the rock soar into the pond while the paper towel just kind of flutters down to the ground. Did Kenny stain his hand on the wood? He might have, but it really doesn't matter because something significant happened before that. Lucy. The narrative wants us to believe that Lucy ran into the house and immediately stained Spenny. However, that's not what happened. The footage depicts Lucy entering the house and crossing a floor dull of any sheen. It is clean and dry. As she crosses the room, she leaves a trail of fresh, muddy paw prints. But when she enters the living room, there's already a shiny, wet trail of paw prints. So what's going on here? Moments ago, the living room floor was dry while Spenny was dusting. How did the living room floor get so wet if this is her first and only time entering the house? And even more important, how can Lucy's entrance be a surprise to Spenny if she's run into the living room enough times to leave this wet trail? What's really going on here? Here's the answer, or at least my hypothesis. The scene is what a lot of you are hoping to hear. It's fake. But it was real at one point. Just hear me out on this one, okay? First of all, this trail must be here because Lucy ran into the living room multiple times. So can I prove Lucy ran into the living room multiple times? Yes. Yes, I can. When Lucy enters the house, you can see Spenny, and you can see the cameraman from Spenny's crew standing over here in the corner. How do I know that's the cameraman? Dark shirt, light jeans. Later in the scene, you can see Spenny's crew here. Dark shirt and light jeans on the cameraman. So the cameraman's standing in the corner of the living room when Lucy passes the threshold for the dining room here. Take note of this pillar and how nobody is around it. Then, when she crosses the threshold for that pillar, and chronologically 0.6 seconds later, he's now filming from behind that pillar. Well, the cameraman didn't run across the room to change filming positions in 0.6 seconds. This proves that Lucy ran into the house once, then they changed filming angles, and she ran in again. You might say to me, well, that must have been Sebi filming from behind the pillar. No, he's still in the dining room, and when Lucy runs out, you can see from Sebi's angle, Spenny's crew is hiding behind that pillar. So this shot is at least a second take of Lucy running into the house. And if that's not enough for you, look closer at the shot of her running into the living room. Nobody is standing in the corner over here. And then it cuts to a shot with Brian standing in the corner. Watch it in super slow motion. Well, okay, so what? What does that prove? Well, it proves to me that if this is at least a second take, then this is at least a third take of Lucy running into the living room. Well, okay, so Lucy ran into the living room multiple times. But wouldn't that mean she stained Spenny multiple times? He must have been changing his stain suit so that they could reshoot the scene. No. After being stained by Lucy, Spenny approaches the camera, and you can see both the coffee stain from the beginning of the competition and the fresh Lucy stain. It might not come through when I post this video because, like I said earlier, my rendering of the episode footage is the third or fourth render in the lifetime of this film, but the coffee stain is definitely still on his arm, and there are definitely no other stains on his arms or legs. So what does that mean? It means she ran into the living room multiple times, but only stained Spenny once. Okay, so if Lucy ran in multiple times, but only stained Spenny once, he must have only stood in for that one take where she actually stained him, right? No. Besides the moment when Lucy actually stained Spenny, you can see Spenny standing in the middle of the living room when his crew is initially in the corner as Lucy runs into the room. So he was definitely in the living room for a multitude of Lucy run-ins. Well, that doesn't even make sense. How the hell is it possible that Lucy ran into the living room 2, 3, 4, 10 times and Spenny was in the living room every single time, but she only stained Spenny once? Well, Kenny gave us the answer early on.
And Lucy loves people.
Lucy loves people. Here's my hypothesis. The first time Lucy ran in, she ran up to Sebby because Lucy loves people. So they reset the house with Sebby standing on the chair beside Brendan and had Lucy run in a second time. The second time Lucy ran in, she ran up to Spenny's crew because Lucy loves people. So they reset the house with Spenny's crew hiding behind the pillar and they had Lucy run in a third time. The third time Lucy ran in, she ran up to Brian because Lucy loves people. So they reset the house with Brian hiding in the corner and had Lucy run in a fourth time. The fourth time Lucy ran into the house, the only person left standing in her immediate field of view was Spenny. So she ran up to Spenny and stained him. So that means the whole scene is fake, right? A scripted scene where Spenny knew before Lucy even entered the house that he was going to be booby-trapped, hijacked, interfered, sabotaged. No, I personally do not believe Spenny knew a dog was going to be muddied up and set loose in the house. However, when Lucy ran up to whoever on that first take, Spenny saw what was going on. I believe that after that first failed attempt, Spenny protested the sabotage, but Kenny and the crew talked him into going along with it for the sake of making a good TV show. Listen, Spenny, the stain's not going to count because it's a sabotage, but it's going to be funny. So just go along with it for the sake of our show. And then, after she jumps on you, we can act out a little argument to make it look like you didn't know it was coming, okay? Yeah, okay. And that's an interesting sidebar. Acting. If you suggest that Spenny is acting, a lot of fans will immediately jump on the defense and say something like, well, only idiots think Spenny's acting because Spenny can't act. Just watch Single White Spenny. So everything in Kenny vs. Spenny must be real. Listen, there is a significant difference between Spenny reciting a script and Spenny doing improv.
I'm about to have sex with a woman the same age as my mother. Is that wrong?
I think she called it a blankie. I snuggled with it all last night, so you might want to scrapbook it or something.
Is this a joke or something?
No, it's not a joke. It's a serious thing.
Lucy, go get him. Hey, how do you know the dog's name?
When acting is necessary on Kenny vs. Spenny, it's improv 90% of the time, so it's much less conspicuous than the acting on Single White Spenny. This scene of them having an argument is improv, and more importantly, it's definitive proof that acting happens on the show by both Kenny and Spenny. Based on the wet paw trail in the living room and the loosely cut editing, there is a statistical probability of 0 that Spenny didn't know there was a sabotage happening where he was going to be stained by a dog. Therefore, the argument that takes place in the aftermath is just the guys acting out what would come naturally had the circumstances been real, which makes this a great place to start a dialogue about the series of tells that both Kenny and Spenny present when they're doing something disingenuous. In this situation, there's 2 tells, and the first tell is that Kenny is yelling.
The door was open, the dog's in the house. I didn't stain you, the dog stained you. It's a stray dog, it's a neighborhood dog.
In the vast majority of arguments between the guys, Spenny does all the yelling and Kenny just makes calm, clearly articulated responses with the intention of irritating Spenny even more than he already is.
I wasn't even finished with the rules.
Well, you said the rule. First,
Idiot! I wanted my suit to be white for the whole show. What I gotta do? Change my name to Ikmir Vaclav so that there's no other guy?
Probably find an Ikmir Vaclav in Russia.
Make me shut up. I'll make you shut up.
How, by kissing me?
So, to me, it's suspicious to see Kenny yell during an argument. And the second tell of acting is that the guys only minimally interrupt each other during this argument. On the rare occasion that the guys get into it on a real back and forth kind of thing, they try and talk over each other.
because you want me, deal with it.
I don't want you. I never wanted you. I never will want you. I don't even want you as a friend. Never mind as a lover. You're making me sick as the roommate.
Well, why aren't they talking over each other here?
The door was open, the dog's in the house. It's a stray dog, it's a neighborhood dog.
It is not a stray dog.
Lucy, go get him.
Hey, how do you know the dog's name? How do you know the dog's name if it's a stray dog?
It has a name
You
tag.
will?
Why are they taking turns to yell at each other? This is important because neither guy is being fueled by his emotions. Spenny knew Lucy was coming, so his outrage isn't genuine. He's just going through the motions that would come naturally if he were responding to a real sabotage. Except he listens to Kenny's excuses so he can compose better rebuttals.
The door was open, the dog's in the house. Oh, it's a stray dog, it's a neighborhood dog.
It is not a stray dog.
Lucy, go get him.
Hey, how do you know the dog's name? How do you know the dog's name if it's a stray dog?
It has a name tag.
You will?
Furthermore, when Spenny starts running out of steam, Kenny basically feeds him the name Lucy as a catalyst for more argument. Look at Spenny come alive again.
It is not a stray dog.
Lucy, go get him.
Hey, how do you know the dog's name?
Why would Kenny do that? Why would he try to call Lucy back into the house? Spenny is already stained. I can't imagine if this were a real sabotage followed by a real argument that Kenny would make such an egregious mistake as to name the dog in front of Spenny and out himself as a saboteur. In this instance, I don't need to read the tells to determine that they're acting. I already know this argument is phony because there's no way in Spenny didn't know Lucy was coming. So let's cycle around to what's really important. Is the scene fake? Did Kenny and Spenny script a scene with rehearsed dialogue where Spenny knew that he was going to be stained by a dog? Or did Spenny find out about the sabotage after Lucy ran up to the wrong person? Well, logic tells me that if the whole scene were scripted, then this argument would be closer to the acting we see in Single White Spenny than the improv acting that's taking place. Well, okay, but that doesn't answer the question. Can I prove Spenny was not in on it from the beginning? Can I prove that Spenny only found out about Lucy when the first sabotage attempt failed? No. I can prove that Lucy ran into the house multiple times. Because of that, I can prove Spenny knew Lucy was coming at some point. And because of that, I can prove this argument is acting. But I cannot prove whether or not Spenny was in on it from the beginning. So let's do this. Was Spenny in on the Lucy bit from the beginning, or did he figure out what was going on after the plan failed and he just went along with it? So after hearing all of that, you might say to me, well, couldn't the pond scene be fake as well? Couldn't Spenny have known that Kenny was going to throw a rock into the pond and the argument that ensues could also be an improv session? Yes, but I don't think so for two reasons. Number one, because Spenny is OCD about safety, and I don't think he would go along with this. But Spenny has done lots of unsafe things on the show. Yes, but I think the outcome of heaving a rock off of the third story is a bit more unpredictable than being tied down to a Jeep or cutting his forehead open to put on a show. Who's to say Kenny doesn't throw it a bit too hard and it ends up, hitting Spenny and fracturing his skull? Like, for that reason, I don't think Spenny knew this was about to happen. He wouldn't have gone along with it. And reason number two, during their argument, Kenny exhibits another tell. But it's not a tell that indicates the scene is fake, it's a tell that indicates the scene is real. I'm not going to elaborate on it here because I'm saving it specifically for the Donna episode, but feel free to speculate in the comments as to what it is. Getting back to the Lucy scene, if you really want to get picky, Spenny lost the competition here because he stained himself. If you look closely, he slips on the wet floor and reaches over Lucy to avoid her front paws. During this fall, he scrapes her left hind leg with his wrist and then knees her in the face, by accident. Lucy didn't even touch him. He touched Lucy. So I would be inclined to say that Spenny lost here, but something happened before this. The fire extinguisher scene. After Kenny initiates a rousing game of "I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you," Spenny blasts the house with the fire extinguisher and everybody runs outside to clear their lungs. The guys find out that their feet are stained and the competition is over. But why is Spenny's foot more stained than Kenny's foot? I noticed that the very first time I watched this episode, and I've been wondering about it ever since. Also, why did they film this in the courtyard when everybody ran out the front door? Like, what difference does it make to walk to the backyard and shoot this shot when everybody was already congregated in the front yard? It's taken over 15 years to get an answer, but I have it. Let's begin with the rules scene. Kenny's coffee spit happened after the competition starts, but before the "can't stain the other guy" rule was laid down. So does Spenny lose the competition here? No. I want to produce a segment discussing exactly when competitions start, but I'm saving that for the dance analysis. So let's just say the coffee spit doesn't count, and we'll come back to it later. Following the rules scene, Kenny takes his hamster wheel upstairs, and Spenny does the film canister shuffle. Once Kenny gets upstairs, he changes into a getup with cleaning supplies, and more importantly, sponges attached to his feet with bungee cords. How do I know they were sponges? When Kenny walks freely down to Spenny's room, we can see the bungee cords and a little bit of yellow from the sponge. Then at the end of the scene, we see a B-roll shot of the film canisters and the sponges with bungee cords on the living room floor. That's why Kenny's feet are less stained than Spenny's after the hasty fire extinguisher exit. Because when Spenny abandoned his film canisters and ran out of the house, he had nothing but his stain suit on his feet. Whereas when Kenny ran out of the house, he was wearing something covering his feet. Well, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't Kenny's feet be perfectly clean if he was wearing something on his feet? Yes, they were perfectly clean. But when they realized the competition was over because Spenny got stained first, they needed a solution to not only continue the competition, but also salvage the fire extinguisher footage. So Kenny took off his sponges, walked to the backyard to stain his feet a little bit, and then they shot this scene. Who got stained first? Spenny. Who was the loser? Kenny. What? Similar to the orb or the Elizabethan collar being grounds for disqualification due to covering a part of the body to prevent a stain, Kenny wore something to prevent a stain. Well, what's the difference between sponge sandals and the film cans that Spenny was shuffling around in? Spenny didn't wear the cans on his feet, he just stood on them. He could potentially slip out of them and get a stain. Whereas Kenny wore the sponges. He attached them to his feet so he could walk around freely. Kenny wore a form of shoes well before wearing shoes was allowed. Kenny is disqualified, Spenny wins. That being said, this episode gets a perfect 5 out of 5 mustard-stained bobbies. One for schemes. It goes without saying that there were many great schemes in this episode. I was even lucky enough to find this cut scheme where Kenny tries to get Spenny to pee his pants twice.
Get out!
Okay.
Close the door.
You can't come in unless you're quiet.
Get out of here!
Okay, get out. Let's get out. You idiots. Back out.
One for interactions. All the way from the coffee spit to the Choco Sabres battle, this whole episode is just Kenny messing with Spenny. One for reactions. All of this...
Kenny! 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 The physics of it doesn't make sense!
combined with Kenny playing dumb...
You said a rock fell off?
It's an old house, man.
Why, is it filthy?
is hilarious. Like, it's exactly what we're here for. One for rewatchability. I regularly rewatch this one. It's one of my favorites. Easily top 5, arguably my personal favorite. And we'll finish off with one full Bobby for secondary character involvement. Brendan.
And winners don't use drugs. Well, a little bit.
Jamie.
Don't be a ass.
Even the editor joined in on the fun by incorporating the humiliation bumper after Spenny's mishaps.
Kenny!
You lost.
You lost.
Oh my God, you lost!
Spencer's lost the competition.
Even though this is one of the greatest episodes, I didn't find any foreshadowing in this one. But it wasn't really necessary either. The whole concept of the rules and having a winner and a loser, like, it all gets lost along the way, and it just becomes a fun episode about guys being guys, which is one of the key tenets of KVS. So let's start a new segment to organize the main principles which make Kenny vs. Spenny unique among a sea of imposters. Semantic games in Stand, happy versus unhappy in Laugh, and guys being guys in Stain. So let's select the next video. Bigger fish. That's going to be an interesting one. We're going to talk about, among other things, some of the posters around the house. So what do you think? Did Spenny win? Did the Lucy scene get shot over and over until Spenny got a stain? Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my conclusions. As always, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to help the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.